Hi, I'm Phil Tangredi. I'm here with Mr. Penella. Mr. Penella, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
All right, Mr. P. What part of your life did you spend in the 1900s?
So I was born in the spring of 1969, so 31 years.
Okay. So where did you live during your time in the 1900s?
So my family and I was born in Washington, D.C., so we lived right outside of Washington, D.C. until I was about 6. And then we moved about an hour west, still in Maryland, and that's where I spent uh, the rest of my teenage years till I left home at 18.
Okay. Do you remember any of the presidents when you were first growing up? And if so, like what caught your eye about them?
Sure. So I remember, obviously, Richard Nixon was the first president that I remember. He obviously, for the historical significance, he resigned the presidency, so that was a pretty big deal. Most of my family worked in some way with the federal government, so there was always kind of like talk about the president, the government, how the government worked and stuff like that. Gerald Ford obviously replaced Richard Nixon. Little side note: my dad was working at the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare at the time, and the president made a kind of a pass through the building just to kind of, I imagine, if my time is right, it was kind of like a re-election kind of thing. He was coming through just to press the flesh, and my dad took my brother and I to work with him that day, and we got to shake hands with the president. So that was pretty cool for a 6 or 7 year old to do that. The one thing I remember about Gerald Ford was just the size of his hands. They were massive. He took my brother's and my hand in one thing and just shook them both together, and then was just like whisked down the hall. So that was pretty cool.
You got any other cool memories about your time in D.C.?
So we, yeah, we. So my grandparents, or my on my dad's side, they lived actually right off of Capitol Hill, right, probably a couple blocks from the Capitol building. So we would go and visit them, and we would go to museums. The Smithsonian museums were kind of a big part of it. For my brother and I, the National Mall was always kind of like our playground. There were, at the time, in front of some of the Smithsonian museums, they would have large, like, statues. I guess they were bronzes of like dinosaurs and other things, and we used to use that kind of as like a jungle gym and just kind of crawl all over it, climb all over it, and stuff like that. So those kind of things are kind of memories of when I was a little kid. And my brother and I both went to a Montessori school not far from the Capitol, and so on the walks home, we would walk by kind of old parks and monuments. So it was kind of like a living history kind of tour as we went back, because we would go to my grandfather's house after school till my dad got off work. Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
yeah.
So I'm a part of the 20th Century Global Issues class, and this question might take a little bit longer than the other questions, but what were some like stories in the news that you remembered or that stuck out to you during the 1900s?
Okay, so obviously, not that I remember it, this one, but the lunar landing was very big. I would have been about 4 months old. I do remember, and the only reason I bring that up is because a while ago I came across some artifacts from our family history. My mom had done a baby book for my brother, and she talked about, and he was like 3 years older than I am, so he would have been 3 at the time, about the lunar landing. So I thought that was kind of neat. So that's, I'm 4 months old then, so I don't really remember that. But as we move forward, I guess the first big one I kind of remember is like the bicentennial for the United States. That was kind of a big deal. And then you kind of move forward. I mean, news stories. We had the hostages in Iran, 3 Mile Island, the Miracle on Ice. There was a stretch in 1981 where President Reagan, there was an assassination attempt on him and an assassination attempt on the Pope, kind of in a relatively short period of time. So that was a big story. Moving forward, the Space Shuttle Challenger accident was pretty big. you know, the fall of the wall in Europe. That was another big one. You know, then you move forward. I mean, there's a ton. I mean, I could go year by year and just tell you, you know, what kind of happened, you know, that year. There's always a big news story every year. But some of them obviously were a little closer to us, or it was the first time happening, you know. So it was there's lots going on.
Yeah. Yeah. What was like piqued your interest the most? Like, what caught your eye the most that stuck with you? Like, what news story?
Well, obviously, the fall of the wall was a big one because I got to live it first person. I was at the time I was stationed in Berlin, and that was kind of, you know, history was happening in front of us. But prior to that, probably as a teenager, you know, from like 12 or 10 to 18, the hostages in Iran were a big one. I mean, that's the first time that kind of that sort of thing had happened, and you know, I was 10 at the time, and so you're kind of, and it's on the news every day, every day. I mean, they were held captive for over 400 days.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, every day. I mean, the you know, there had been an attempt to rescue them that had gone badly, and I remember that was on the cover of Newsweek. I think it was Newsweek magazine. They had a picture basically of the helicopters that had exploded, and you know, the dead bodies were there. It was pretty graphic, you know, as far as like nothing like that had ever happened. Like, I grew up in a point where there's only 3 stations on TV for us, so there's no CNN, so we didn't have like a 24-hour news cycle for us, especially as a child, wasn't huge. So we only got whatever we had from adults talking about it. Maybe if, you know, the newspaper, you might read it, but you didn't. When you're young, you don't read the newspaper. You get the comics, and your dad takes the rest of the paper and goes away with it. So that was a big one in elementary school, was the hostages in Iran, and then obviously into high school, the Challenger explosion was huge. Again, we had never, in my lifetime, had lost astronauts going into space. Mm-hmm. It didn't, and on top of that, there was a civilian on the flight too, and you know, I'm sure you've seen all the file footage and stuff like that of them showing it in classrooms, and I just remember we had stopped kind of watching them live, right? And so we saw it like on a replay, and so we were in school. It was right before lunch, and it exploded, and you went to the cafeteria, and then, you know, news traveled verbally. You know, there wasn't cell phones or anything like that to kind of like a mass notification. It just became one person after the other, after the other, after the other. So those were the big ones kind of growing up. And then, of course, I joined the Army. They sent me to Europe, and I was fortunate enough to be in a place where history was happening right in front of us. I honestly I could talk forever on that. The day, you know, the evening before, there had been kind of, you know, rumblings that something big was happening, and so the next day, we went down to Checkpoint Charlie, which is kind of like the division between East and West Berlin, and it was just a mass of humanity coming through. People on the western side waiting for people to come across, people from the eastern side coming through. I mean, I remember people crying, people were hugging. It was pretty neat. And then that evening, we went down to Brandenburg Gate, at the wall, the wall went around the city, but there was a spot kind of at Brandenburg Gate was kind of like a big kind of like open space. And it was, I mean, you could have walked across the people. And so everybody got up to the wall. There were people on top. So people were lifting people up on top and standing on top. And then you could look into East Berlin, and the East German soldiers on the other side were just standing there. They were just, and nobody really went over the wall, but they weren't doing anything. And usually, anything where you got close to the wall, there would be sentries there to kind of like make sure you didn't go any farther. Like climbing on the wall was like a definite no. But it was crazy. There were people there with chisels, hammers, just taking their whacks at it, and pieces of concrete flying everywhere. So, but it was just, I mean, if you can think of it, it was probably, I don't want to say maybe 10 feet tall. I can't even remember. It was definitely, you had to be lifted. It wasn't like something, but it was wide. There was width. So there was people 3 or 4 deep standing on top, just screaming and hooting. It was like, New Year's Eve times 100. It was really, really cool. It was really, really cool. And then that went on for a couple days for us. And then, of course, obviously we get back to going back to work and things like that. But you would go back and maybe collect pieces, collect chunks and stuff like that. So it was really neat. And then I believe that was November of 1989, Reunification Day, which I believe might have been like October of 1990. Again, huge party. I mean, fireworks, everything. I mean, it was pretty awesome.
As a child, like, were there any stories on the news that caused you fear, that made you scared?
I think the beauty of growing up at that time, again, 3 news stations, right, or 3 channels, we were pretty insulated as kids, I think. You can think of like 3 Mile Island was a pretty big story. There was a nuclear meltdown in Pennsylvania, but I don't remember fear for me. I guess my parents did a pretty good job of insulating me from that sort of stuff. So we there wasn't anything fear. I mean, we had obviously the threat of nuclear war was always there. But again, as a child, either I was really, really naive, dumb, innocent. I'm sure my parents and my grandparents worried about those things. We had early on we had energy crises and things like that. But for a kid, no, there was never really any really worrying about that. I mean, I guess I lived a pretty charmed life up till, the first one where you think you're worried, to tell you the truth, Phil, was 9/11, and that obviously happened in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. But again, that time I was in my early 30s, and worried. I mean, I think more you were angry would have been my first thought. But as a kid, no, not really. Nothing really. Too young, thankfully.
Tell me a story or two about your grandparents and how they lived their lives.
My grandparents on my dad's side were first generation Americans. My grandfather's mom and dad came from Italy, and my grandmother's mom and dad came from Italy. So they were born in the early 20th century, around 1913. I think my grandmother was born in 1911. My grandmother unfortunately passed away when she was in 1945. So it was my grandfather on that side of the family was the surviving member. But he was very, very thrifty. Everything had a dual use, had a use over and over again. On my mother's side, my grandparents were they were from New York, New Jersey, but they moved to D.C. for work. But they were very kind of like 50-ish. I mean, people that grew up in that era. I rarely remember my grandmother wearing slacks. It was always a skirt. My grandfather would go to work in a shirt and a tie and things like that. He worked for the Department of Transportation. So there was kind of, and my grandparents on my mother's side had 5 kids. They lived in a nice suburban house. It was really, for us as grandkids, it was awesome because it was just my brother and I for a long time. My mother was the oldest on her side of the family, so we had our grandparents for ourselves for a long time before we had younger cousins come along. It was awesome.
Yeah. Talk about a little bit about what brought you happiness in the 1900s.
I think playing outside, doing things. There was much. I don't want to use the word simpler because it makes it sound like it was easy, but it was fun. It was really, really fun being a kid growing up in the 70s and 80s. I mean, we still got in trouble. We didn't get caught a lot, but we got in trouble, and we did. There were consequences, and the beauty of it is you could get caught by anybody on your block. It was like everybody kind of looked out for everybody else, and if you were doing something wrong and your neighbor happened to see you, he would whoop that ass, and it was okay, and he would yell at you, and so no, but it was fun. We had a great time. We lived out in the country after we moved away from DC, so I mean, endless exploring outside, and it was awesome. We didn't have to worry about some of the things that you worry about now, raising kids. It was awesome.
Yeah. With your life experience, what's the best advice you'd give me as a high school student?
Enjoy high school. Enjoy it as much as you can. I know there's only a couple more weeks left, but I mean, being an adult is fun, but it's never nearly as fun as being a high school kid. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Don't do anything stupid, but it's really, when you look back on this, you're gonna look back fondly and be like, wow, this was pretty cool. I had it pretty good. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What was your time like in the Army?
It was great. It's just what I needed at that point in my life. I wasn't a terribly diligent student, and so I needed a little bit of time after high school to kind of figure out what I was doing, and the Army provided me with that, provided me with, discipline that I used the rest of my life, and a little bit of structure. But I think most of all, it provided me with some time to kind of figure out what I wanted to do, and what I wanted to be, because I wouldn't say I was lost, but I was kind of trying to I was drifting, and it gave me kind of the stability I needed, rather than just kind of staying at home and getting into trouble or not having any kind of direction. So I'm eternally grateful for that decision. I'm eternally grateful for the decision that my dad allowed me to do that, because at the time I wasn't 18. That was a great decision by me, and that he supported, and it ended up working out really well for me.
How long were you in for?
4 years.
4 years?
4 years, one enlistment. Yep. And then by the time there were a couple factors at the end. It was the end of the Cold War, so we were President Bush, the first President Bush, was trying to reduce some of the numbers, force numbers, so we did do that. And so, and it was I wanted to go to college. I had taken some night school and had done really well, and so I knew I had the aptitude to succeed in college. It was at that point where it was in my best interest to try that, and I'm glad I did. But I will always think that my time in the service was very, very, very formative.
How did you meet Mrs. P?
I met Mrs. Penella. I was working at a physical therapy clinic, and she was working as a nurse in a hospital, and my department was on the ground floor, hers was on the third floor, and we would go up and see patients, and we just happened to meet there. So I work.
So you met her at work.
Met her at work, yeah.
How do you think dating has changed now from like the 1900s?
Well, in the 1900s, you had to go up and talk to somebody. You didn't have the benefit of an app, and yeah, you just kind of had to put yourself out there. I mean, she easily could have said no. Don't ask her that question. In retrospect, she may. No, I'm just joking. But no, there was a lot more face to face. I mean, there was I guess there was computer dating at the time, but it wasn't the proliferation that there is now.
Yeah.
So, no, you had to make that personal connection, and there were only so many places you could meet people. Bars, church, work. So,
Yeah.
but it all worked out for me.
Yep, it did. Thank you for being here and taking your time out of your day to be here with us, Mr. P.
Phil, it was awesome. Great place here. I wish we could probably spend an hour just talking about the things that happened just in my lifetime. So I really appreciate you just making time for me. It was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Take care.